I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. At Thursday's Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, Senator Mazie Hirono questioned FBI Director Christopher Wray on a range of issues, including racist hate crimes and threats to minorities in the United States. Hirono, a progressive Democrat from Hawaii, spoke about increased threats against people of Asian descent. She connected a rise in anti-AAPI hate crimes to racist rhetoric surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. From the outset of the pandemic, former President Trump and many on the far right have used derogatory terms in reference to China, which critics have said raises threat concerns against people in Asian American communities.
To complete our questioning, Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Director Wray. When we talk about your concern about domestic terrorism, which you had indicated in prior testimony was a top concern, that racially and ethnically motivated violent extremism was at the highest threat level. So you noted that here are some of the indicators that you would look at in terms of who commits domestic terrorism, lone actor. So for that, you suggest that if the community, if they see something, you have to say something. Not the easiest thing. And then the second factor, largely radicalized online, and also very difficult to get at because we have First Amendment issues and other issues. And then the third factor you noted was easy access to weapons. I'm looking at the third factor, and what would you suggest that we should be looking to limit the easy access to guns? Briefly.
Well, certainly, guns are one of the weapons that domestic violent extremists use and have easy access to. Obviously, we want to make sure we're focusing under the laws that we have on the individuals who pursue them. We also are seeing violent extremists use crude IEDs that they can make fairly easily off of the internet.
Well, let's focus on guns. Should people be able to have easy access to AR-15s? And you noted that you've seen an increase in modifying guns so that they become automatic. So are those areas that we should address to limit the mass shootings that we see practically every single day in our country?
Well, I, as you can appreciate, Senator, I'm not going to comment on specific legislative ideas. That's not my place or my role. I will say that there are individuals who represent a danger, who are hell-bent on committing violence, and those are people we want to prevent in whatever way we lawfully and appropriately can from getting access to weapons and hurting innocent Americans.
It would be great, frankly, if we had law enforcement officials who actually came forward and were not as reticent as all that, because our nation is awash in guns. You also noted that there's been an increase in violence after the Dobbs decision. Now, historically, we've seen the violence directed against the murder of abortion doctors, the firebombing of abortion clinics. And I note that today you said that you don't care where their orientation is, that anybody who threatens or engages in this kind of violence should be prosecuted. So do you keep track of the rise in violence after the Dobbs decision? Because I think that kind of information will be very useful.
We have various ways of keeping track. How it's broken down, that I can't sit here and tell you right now. I know that we keep track of what we call abortion-related violent extremism, which is designed to capture the full spectrum of people who commit violence on either side of that issue. And I believe we have seen, an uptick in that category.
I think that would be really important for us to have, because frankly, I mean, there's been a tremendous increase in threats against members of the House and the Senate. And I actually have been the recipient of such a threat, and the person was prosecuted, and he threatened me because I supported abortion. So you have a situation such as in the state of Texas, where you have bounty hunters who can go after people who provide abortions in that state and who assist. These are not even law enforcement people. Do you have some concerns about what might happen if you have all of these people literally, able to go after people for $10,000 in bounty?
Well, I have concerns about anybody who is going to violate federal criminal law and engage in violence, whether it's motivated by violent extremism related to abortion or anything else.
I would say that if a state creates the kind of environment where non-law enforcement people can be induced by $10,000, I think that is an issue, an area of concern. I hope that the FBI will be paying special attention to states that provide that kind of environment. Let me turn to child sexual exploitation among Native Hawaiians. This kind of exploitation impacts Native Hawaiian children in the state of Hawaii disproportionately. And according to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, Native Hawaiian women and girls represent 67 to 77% of sex trafficking victims identified in recent studies. Native Hawaiians also represent 37% of reported child sex trafficking cases, and although federal government owes the same trust responsibility to Native Hawaiians as it does to American Indians and Alaskan Natives, bills like the Violence Against Women Act, where Native Hawaiian nonprofit organizations and tribal nonprofit organizations are both eligible for these same grant programs, but the VAWA bill fails to allow Native Hawaiian women and children to qualify for any type of support or innovation. So here's my question. I hope that the Bureau will begin to include Native Hawaiians in your work to address the missing and murdered Indigenous people crisis and violence against Indigenous people, because even if VAWA doesn't specifically allow for protection of Hawaiian women and children, there is nothing that stops the FBI from including Native Hawaiian women and children as part of your charge. Can you begin to talk about it, include them in your programmatic efforts?
I will say that I think you put your finger on an important issue, and that our Honolulu office has been working very hard to target and aggressively pursue federal charges on known and repeat human trafficking offenders. And what they're seeing, what they tell me, is that that you're seeing gangs and drug trafficking organizations exploit vulnerable victims, and in particular, the lion's share, as you say, with the statistics that you were citing, the lion's share of that is on displaced or marginalized sectors, especially Native Hawaiians. And in fact, I think it was just this past week, our Honolulu office recovered, I think, 3 minor females who were missing and at risk on the Big Island, and I know they're very aggressively working that issue.
That's good to know. And Mr. Chairman, just one more thing. Director, you were asked a number of questions about the China Initiative, and I will say that when you have an environment where you talk about the pandemic is the Chinese virus and the Kung flu, you create an environment where you see a rise in hate crimes against Asians. And basically, you know what, as though people can recognize that I don't happen to be Chinese, but there are a lot of people who think I am. So the China Initiative led to some abuses by the FBI and who they were going to target, including some researchers and others who the FBI admitted having basically railroaded. So I hope that the FBI has some guardrails in how they're going to pursue investigations that do not target based on race and ethnicity. And you can sit there and tell me that you do have that, but it's a concern. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.